Testing Azure SQL Managed Identity is a crucial step in verifying the secure connection between your Azure resources and Azure SQL database. In this tutorial, we will walk through the process of testing Azure SQL Managed Identity step by step. First, we need to understand what Managed Identity is. Managed Identity is a feature in Azure that allows Azure resources to authenticate to Azure services without needing to manage credentials. To test Azure SQL Managed Identity, we will start by creating an Azure SQL database and enabling Managed Identity for an Azure virtual machine. We will then install the Azure CLI and use it to assign the managed identity to the virtual machine. Next, we will create a system-assigned managed identity for the virtual machine and then assign the necessary permissions to the managed identity to access the Azure SQL database. After assigning the permissions, we will then use the Azure CLI to test the connection to the Azure SQL database using the managed identity. We will do this by running a query against the database. To do this, we will use the Azure CLI command as SQL DB query to execute a query against the database. If the query executes successfully, then we have verified that the managed identity is working correctly. In terms of best practices, it is recommended to use managed identity to authenticate to Azure services whenever possible. This is because managed identity eliminates the need to manage credentials and reduces the risk of credential exposure. Additionally, it is recommended to assign the minimum necessary permissions to the managed identity to follow the principle of least privilege. This will reduce the risk of unauthorized access to the Azure SQL database. In conclusion, testing Azure SQL Managed Identity is an important step in verifying the secure connection between your Azure resources and Azure SQL database. By following the steps outlined in this tutorial, you can ensure that your managed identity is working correctly and that your Azure SQL database is secure.